The second item under the order of unfinished business pertains to this body's actions related to transportation network companies, and specifically rideshare pay rates, monitoring and enforcement, and other associated issues. These prior actions are listed on the agenda for reference. As we know, and as widely covered in the news media, the state legislature acted in its final hours to preempt the City Council to enact a statewide law setting minimum rates of compensation for TNC drivers. That's good news, and we're proud of our work to advance that issue and to address the need to provide fair wages for our drivers. Nevertheless, the preemption by the state voids our original ordinance, which was enacted over the mayor's veto, and also makes void the further associated actions, which are currently in our local legislative process for consideration. So as shown on the agenda, I am proposing that we recall ordinance number 2024-009, as well as the 3 associated actions, and return all those items to the authors. I'll point out that under Council Rule 8.7, this is the proper motion for giving final disposition to an ordinance that is neither approved nor denied. Instead, this action merely voids all of those actions and closes the files and limbs. After consulting with the city clerk, I understand it is his intention to annotate those files with a reference to the state action that preempts the city for future research and historical purposes. So as shown on the agenda, all of these actions are under limbs file number 2024-00146. We would be closing that file, annotating with a reference to the state's action, and those matters would be removed from our agenda. I want to thank the authors for their work and to bring these proposals forward. Clearly, our local efforts resulted in workplace improvements for the entire state, and I think we should be justly proud of that outcome. Are there any questions about the proposed actions? Seeing none, I'll move to return all actions listed on the agenda associated with limbs file number 2024-00146 to the authors. May I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Councilmember Wansley.
Council President Payne, I will ask the clerks to, is there space to just have a couple of points to share on this, or should we take the vote first?
The floor is open for discussion.
Okay. Awesome. I just want to offer a couple of points on this, because it's also a celebratory day, I think, for a number of us. I think all of us are aware, in the fall of 2022, we had hundreds of drivers, thanks to the efforts of Councilmember Osmond for being their direct champion here. We had hundreds of drivers come to City Hall repeatedly to tell us about the poverty wages that they were earning, and also the exploitative workplace conditions that they were being subjected to by Uber and Lyft. As also the DLI study highlights, became very aware that many of these workers were Black, brown, and immigrant who were struggling to pay rent and support their families. And Councilmember Osmond, alongside those drivers, asked us as council members to stand with those drivers in their fight for minimum wages and basic worker rights protections that thousands of other workers in Minneapolis have because of ordinance actions that this body have taken. And I'm proud to say 18 months later, we are celebrating the fruits of that labor alongside our state leaders, because we work together to deliver drivers a statewide policy that gives them nearly a 20% raise and some of the strongest worker protections in the country. And this victory was only made possible because drivers and their socialist and progressive allies on council and in the state were not deterred by corporate lobbyists and repeated vetoes, both by Governor Walz and Mayor Frey. We persevered and passed a strong ordinance this March that set the terms for the state policy that we are celebrating and have been celebrating since its passage on Sunday. And throughout this policy fight, Uber and Lyft have used the same bullying and scare tactics that have allowed them to block worker protections in cities and states across the country. And it's these two profit-hungry tech companies, they've been successfully able to pressure many elected officials to allow them to continue their exploitative labor practices. And here in Minnesota, some council members, legislators, and executive leaders were pressured into prioritizing Uber and Lyft's profits over the minimum wage needs of our majority Black and immigrant rideshare driver workforce. An example of this was Governor Walz's decision to champion Uber and Lyft's demands for preemption. And I think it's widely known amongst the labor movement that preemption is inherently anti-worker and will be weaponized to dissuade unions, community organizations, as well as other cities from championing crucial worker protections at the local level like we did here in Minneapolis. And it's Governor Walz's decision to side with corporations over workers that will leave a long-standing scar on his legacy when it comes to workers' rights. And while some elected officials caved, again, I just want to extend gratitude for a majority of us that stood strong with the workers and working class residents who actually make the city run and the state run. And because of you all holding strong and not succumbing to corporate pressure or bullying, drivers won the statewide victory. And it's the Minneapolis ordinance and its reverberating impacts that represents a crucial threat to all corporations who think they are above the law and who are used to being able to bully elected officials into basically letting them do whatever and especially exploit workers. So the Minnesota drivers' victory is part of a history of working class people of color refusing to settle for the unjust status quo. In this case, it was around our rideshare industry. And I think all of us know, because it's been a 2-year fight, this was not one that was easy to win. But it does demonstrate that when we do take on corporate interests for the sake of protecting working class residents, those fights are not they're not impossible. And drivers won despite corporate money and corporate pressure. And I hope that other cities and workers from across the country can take note of the local victory here and be encouraged to continue this growing fight and movement to challenge exploitative companies like Uber and Lyft in order to deliver the necessary protections and fair wages to their respective rideshare drivers, especially my hometown, Chicago. They are up next. I know they had a press conference yesterday discussing their efforts to lead legislative changes for regulations around rideshare. And I wish you well. Know that you have champions here on the council, also at the state level, who are willing to support you every step of the way. So I just want to say thank you again to my colleagues. Thank you to my co-authors. Could not have done or gotten this far without you, Councilmember Chavez, Councilmember Osmond, Councilmember Chowdhury, and Councilmember Chugtai. We spent one too many hours at the Capitol getting this agreement through across the finish line. And I thank you for the moments of cheering all of us on. Councilmember Chowdhury, thank you for recognizing the moments when we were drained and turning on Kendrick Lamar, not like us, to give us the spirit to continue forward and recognizing what was needed in that moment to champion the needs of drivers, despite the pushback of Uber and Lyft and actually the governor at times. So I am so thankful for my colleagues. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councilmember Wansley. Vice President Chugtai.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've discussed this issue several times at this dais, so I'm not going to speak to the substance of it as I have before, but just wanted to take some time to thank the number of colleagues who have worked on different pieces of this over the last couple of years and especially over the last few months in the work I've seen you do through partners in public, through your newsletters. Of course, starting with Councilmember Wansley, the author, the lead author of this work at City Hall. You are so persistent and so diligent, and you do not give up. And I am so grateful to serve with you. Thank you for all of your work in bringing us along in the process, in always prioritizing the people we're doing this for, the 10,000 workers, Minnesotans, whose lives are going to change for the better. as a result of all of that work. Thank you. And then, of course, Councilmember Osman and Councilmember Chavez for your leadership on this. Councilmember Chowdhury, our new incoming councilmember who took on being our IGR chair and really put in the work at the Capitol and brought all of us along and kept us on the phones and kept us talking to our legislative partners and making sure that we stood strong and got the best possible result at the state and held our partners accountable to doing that too. That would not have happened without you. To council members Cashman and Koski in your work with our with partners in the tourism industry, in the downtown business community, in finding creative solutions when Uber and Lyft were ready to abandon our communities. You were linking arms with the people who make Minneapolis and its economy work to figure out how we creatively build our new this new economy without those two multi-billion-dollar corporations, and of course our council president for leading us through this work. Thank you.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Mr. Chair, I'm grateful that work at the state legislature and pressure from Governor Walz has resulted in a compromise that will result in Uber and Lyft able to continue operations in Minneapolis and across our state. I should also start by saying I'm pleased that my colleagues are good with this end result. I'm glad to see your tears of happiness today. I truly am. I think this is a very good result, though the process to get here was quite the wild ride. On March 14th, 10 of my colleagues chose to disregard the recommendations from the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry's wage study and instead passed rates based on 1 week of data from Seattle, Washington. Despite warnings from drivers, riders, and TNC companies, my colleagues proceeded hastily and recklessly, I think, to pass these rates that we have in front of us today. The Dolly study was minimum wage and then some, and the truth of that really matters here. My colleagues ignored the concerns of their constituents who rely on these services, most as riders, some as drivers. For many of these people, the absence of Uber and Lyft was not simply the absence of a convenient ride home after a night out. It was the absence of a sole source of income or the ride they relied on to get to work, medical care, the grocery store, or school. So when I hear my colleagues claim victory, I need to call their bluff. This ordinance resulted in thousands of contacts from devastated, anxious residents, many of them low income or seniors or individuals with disabilities. It consumed so much of the time at the legislature that the session ended without a bonding bill. And that comes at a cost to all Minnesotans. And for Minneapolis, it means no funding needs throughout our city, like the Nicollet Avenue Bridge, like roof depot compensation, like things that have been very important and are written down as part of our legislative agenda. And it required the state legislature to intervene and save the city from the consequences of its own ordinance. Preemption is the price we're paying for poor policymaking by this body. The statewide rates result in a 14% raise for drivers. That is identical to the raise they would have received with Mayor Frye's proposal from months ago. I'm not sure I need to remind my colleagues that the pay level adopted was far closer to the mayor's proposal than what the council enacted. We could have come to a compromise on this. We could have avoided preemption, and we could have ended the session with a bonding bill, perhaps. But sadly, throughout this whole process, it seemed like many of my colleagues were more focused on other things than sound policy making. So I hope this has been a learning opportunity for my colleagues. None of us were elected to this body with a mandate. None of us were elected for anything about fulfilling the goals of a particular political party or an agenda. We were elected to represent residents and listen to every voice, not just the loudest ones. And those are my thoughts as we proceed, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Osmond, you're in queue twice, but I understand one of those is for Councilmember Ellison.
Yes, Allison will be the next one, but I'm not going to get into it. This is done deal. This is victory. I do want to take the time to really thank Councilmember Wansley. You have stood up, you have shown leadership, and you put an example of working together and fighting for drivers. So thank you. Thank you for your leadership. And Councilmember Ellison is next.
Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I was gonna hold off from making comments, but I do think it's important for the public to understand sometimes the way that policy making gets made is through the due diligence of information. Sometimes good policy making happens because of pressure. And I think that that's a part of what happened here. I want to remind folks that when this policy came up, was it a year plus ago? We were told then that the state was going to take action, right? The authors were told then that the state was going to take action. That cannot be an invisible part or a minimal part of the story here. It is probably the most critical part that set the next year into motion. Council members took a step back. The authors took a step back, and I want to remind folks, I was not one of the authors, right? I was sort of trying to not have too much of a dog in this fight. I do believe in fair pay and pay equity, but I wasn't one of the authors. But the authors took a step back and allowed the state to do their process. When the pressure was off, the state did not act. And that's not a knock at the state. I know there's a lot of players there. I know it's a complex issue. But when the pressure was off, the state did not act. And so the authors began their work again. And I believe that at several points in this process, had the council not proceeded, the state wouldn't have proceeded. That's what history tells me, right? We can't know that for sure, but that is what history tells me. I think the evidence is there overwhelmingly. The pressure that our actions took resulted in statewide policy. And so I think that when when council members are declaring victory over this policy, sure, it's not the victory of the ordinance they authored. But I do think that it's appropriate to say we had to apply a tremendous amount of pressure in order to maintain a victory for workers that goes beyond Minneapolis. And so, is that sort of the kind of municipal policy making that I prefer, that I know a lot of us prefer? No, that's politics. But there is a part of our job that isn't just ordinance drafting. There's a part of this job that is about pressure, that is about making sure that your strategy results in the best possible outcome. And so what occurred here was that the strategy that the authors engaged in, that I'll agree, took up more time than I wanted it to, right? But the strategy that the authors engaged in proved to be the strategy necessary in order to get this passed and in order for this thing to take shape in the way that it needed to. And so kudos to the folks, to the state legislators who did champion this work and did push it forward. But I think that it is well appropriate for the authors to look at the result that we're seeing from the state and understand acutely the role that they played in the outcome. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wansley.
First, thank you to my colleagues, Councilmember Osmond and Councilmember Ellison, for raising a couple of things. I did want to provide clarity on some of the points that Councilmember Palmisano raised in terms of I keep hearing this very inaccurate framing of our policy efforts here, that we rushed and that it was done in a hasted way, a rushed way, without any consideration. And for a number of co-authors who are of color and who have earned an election certificate just like anyone else. I really want to push back on some of the problematic undertones of that, especially when it's public knowledge that we've spent 18 months on developing this policy. And it started with initiating conversations with the mayor's administration that provided the very first and original compensation proposal that they developed in consultation with other national experts from across the country. So one right there, 18 months of our due diligence in developing a legislative framework to drive this policy forward that was repeatedly analyzed by our own efforts. We asked the policy and research team to analyze it. We asked other national consultants to analyze it. We welcomed the additional analysis that came from the state. So the idea that we went into this ignorant and just did not care is just simply not true. Second, this idea that this body was responsible for the lack of execution on the bonding bill is also ridiculous. We entered into conversations months ago with our state leaders, as many of you asked us, especially Councilmember Palmisano. You said, wait, as Councilmember Ellison highlighted, wait on the state, talk to the state, and that's exactly what we did. And we informed all of you all in regular email updates about those conversations with the state, where the goal was to come to an agreement, because our goal has always been, yes, we want a minimum wage and protection-based policy for drivers here in Minneapolis, but we also want that for 10,000 drivers across the state. And that's exactly what we did. We entered in conversations a month ago and then reached the agreement that we had intended to pass today with the $127 per mile and 51 cents per minute. Unfortunately, conversations over the weekend took a different turn when Uber and Lyft upped the pressure on Walt, and we had to go back to the negotiations table. And I thank my council members, Chaudhry and Council Vice President Chugtai, for actually being there in the space to get us to a place of agreement. Also, state leaders know how to do their job. They know they had ample opportunities to pass a bonding bill prior to the end of session, and that is something that they had to deal with, along with disruptions from Republicans, which everyone saw over this weekend. So, again, the idea that we basically halted the delivery of a bonding bill, please miss me with that. And then lastly, the piece around we did not take up Mayor Frye's proposal. Every proposal that Mayor Frye gave to the co-authors formally through his administration, which was through the $1.40 per mile and 51 cents per minute, also the $117.34 per minute policy, those were all directly communicated to the co-authors in this body. And we seriously considered them. We did analysis that you all were here to receive input on and to also review. It is unfortunate that those policies, per the research, demonstrated that would have given drivers sub-minimum earnings. It would not allow them to take a minimum wage home that also included the cost of doing business here in Minneapolis. So Mayor Frye's administration, and he was directly engaged throughout this process, unfortunately, his proposals just weren't going to be what was needed to get us a strong policy at the state. In fact, I would say if we listened to Mayor Frye's subpar proposals at the local level, we would not have won the statewide policy that we got right now. So I want to disrupt and push back on that piece too. Mayor Frye's proposal was heavily considered in our deliberations around this policy. Also, I want to push back on this idea that we took up too much time. There is a number of bills here that people have been asking for rent control for several years now and ain't got it. So the idea that this took up too much time, the 2040 plan also needed state assistance to get through the finish line. That didn't take up too much time. We were willing to deliver on that. So I just want to highlight a couple pieces here.
Speaking of time, Councilmember, your time is expired.
And I'm done right now, and I'll conclude.
Councilmember Chaudhry.
Thank you, Chair Payne. I was just going to take a moment to thank Majority Leader Long, Majority Leader Aaron Murphy, Senator Fateh, Representative Hassan
for their work and partnership at the legislature. Thank our Queer Caucus and our Posse Caucus for calling us in to come to the table, the efforts of our drivers, and I really wanted to thank our intergovernmental relations team, our director, Katie Topinka, and Steve User, who provided really great counsel and advice throughout this process through the legislative session. I was really glad to see that we were able to, when we did the extension, do what we set out to do, which is collaborate with state leaders, create opportunities for new rideshare companies to be licensed and expand the market, and also for us to deliver the strongest legislation in the nation on this. There were some really, really great things done this legislative session. And I'll just give a quote from Majority Leader Long the night that the legislature, the governor, and everyone came together on an agreement. I give tremendous credit to the City Council. We didn't get a bill passed last year. The City Council did. They stepped up. They stood up for drivers. They forced the issue at the state capitol. They made sure we were going to be responding no matter what. They set a high bar for what we want to talk about for wages for drivers, and they made sure that we were standing strong. They forced the conversation here and made sure we had the strongest deal possible for drivers. And that's what I want to root us in today. We have people who are living at or below the poverty wage, that are relying on public assistance, that immigrated to this country for a better life, a story that I know really, really well, and I know many colleagues up here when we're thinking about our parents or ourselves. So truly a gratitude to the drivers who have been pushing and showing up day in and day out. And I'm just proud that they'll be getting a 20% increase. And they're not going to need to go another year without that increase. And I am just excited to see the ripple effect that this will have. Right? In Massachusetts, they're looking at path to unionization. Chicago is taking on this work. There's interest in the city of Denver, and these conversations are ongoing. And this is the best of the city of Minneapolis, when the city and state can work together, whether it's $15 minimum wage, paid family medical leave, and now rideshare, because this is an issue that impacts the workers in our city. This is an issue that does impact our constituents. This is the business of the city of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota. And today is a day for us to be proud. It was a Uber Lyft to get this done, to add some levity. Because I think we all need to laugh a little bit. And I'm excited for this to be something that we move forward on. And I thank my colleagues. I'm glad that we could work together as a team and move this forward. There might be differences here, but what we're looking ahead at and next year in December is an amazing policy that will be enacted statewide for all cities in the city of Minneapolis, or state of Minnesota. There we go.
Thank you for those comments. Seeing no one else in queue, I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Koski.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osman.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vita.
Aye.
Vice President Chugtai.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries, and those ordinances have been returned to author.